Just leave the gift and go. I don't consider you as family. On the day of my father-in-law's funeral, my mother-in-law said this to me, making a shooing gesture. Besides, if people find out that a poor and disgraceful woman like you is my daughter-in-law, it would be a shame for the entire family. I was worn out by my mother-in-law's attitude and harassment, so I decided to do as she said and just leave the gift and go. 3 days after the funeral, I was struck by mysterious nausea and ill health, and I went back to my parents' home to recuperate. While resting in the living room, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, my frantic mother-in-law grabbed my hands and said, "I'm sorry, I had no idea this was happening." My name is Rosemary. I had been single forever, but at the age of 30, I met Kevin through a hobby class that a friend invited me to. We hit it off because of our many common interests, and after a year of dating, we got married. Kevin is the same age as me. He's very handsome, kind, highly educated, and came from a wealthy and respectable family. I didn't know about his background when we started dating, so I didn't choose him for those reasons. In fact, I felt that there must be many more wonderful women who would be a better match for him than me. When I found out about Kevin's qualifications, I was so worried that we might be mismatched, and I wondered if I was really good enough for him. But Kevin accepted me. "I love you, Rosemary. You're the one." I accepted his proposal, and we got married. He's the son of a listed enterprise CEO, and is on the fast track to success. I couldn't help but wonder why such an impressive man hadn't had any relationships with women until he was 30, but I was so ecstatic that I didn't have time to worry about it. He never let his father's power get to his head or become lazy. He worked hard and climbed the corporate ladder, and it seems he was finally recognized as a successor by his father, the president, just recently. My husband and father-in-law were very busy preparing to take over the company, so they were rarely home, and we didn't have much family time. It seemed like they only came home to sleep, but they never neglected me. They would contact me when they had time, and they prioritized spending time with me on their rare days off. Honestly, he was a good husband. I vowed to support him forever. I was truly happy to be his wife, except for one thing. After getting married, I moved into Kevin's family home. I had planned to work to repay the student loans I had taken out during college, but Kevin pleaded, "I'll work hard to earn enough for the both of us, so please stay home and support me." I gave in to my husband's insistence and quit my job, moving into my in-laws' house. Honestly, I liked my job, so quitting was a bit of a shock. It turned out that the reason I quit my job was that my mother-in-law, Josie, had interfered with Kevin. She had apparently convinced him that a working wife would reflect poorly on the husband. Because of that, I ended up spending most of my day at my in-laws' house. My husband and father-in-law were rarely home because they were busy, but my stay-at-home mother-in-law, Josie, was always there, and I spent a lot of time with her. But this mother-in-law was a person to be wary of. Josie seemed to dislike me, tormenting me with harassment and snide remarks. The reason was probably that she thought I was beneath their social status. Her family was wealthy and consisted of business owners. Moreover, they came from a good family background, and apparently there were many influential figures in politics, finance, medicine, chemistry, and various other fields in their clan. Almost all their family members were highly educated, having graduated from Harvard or other prestigious universities. And my mother-in-law herself had graduated from a renowned university. She was proud of this and flaunted it. On the other hand, my family was just an ordinary one. My parents were regular office workers, and we were neither poor nor wealthy. I attended a regular college, and I paid for my tuition with scholarships. It wasn't just my family background or university that Josie complained about. She also criticized my appearance. Josie in her 50s was beautiful and youthful, always dressed in flashy designer brands. She had been a model when she was young, won beauty contests in college, and was working in sales at the largest advertising agency before getting married. I, on the other hand, had no interest in designer brands and preferred to spend my money on anime and game merchandise. As a result, I was never considered beautiful. I did the bare minimum with makeup and fashion and took care of my figure, but my appearance was quite plain. Naturally, the glamorous world of modeling, beauty contests, and major advertising agencies was foreign to me. My social media was all about games and anime. Josie seemed really displeased that her son had married someone as plain and low as me, both in education and family background. So she harassed me in every way she could think of. She would intentionally spill Coke on my freshly washed clothes, or mess up a room I had just cleaned. Entertainment was forbidden. I was forced to quit the hobby that led me to meet Kevin, and she deleted all my contacts. My anime and game collections were sold off at a very low price, and the money became Josie's pocket money. I couldn't even go shopping without being attacked with nasty comments. My clothes and cosmetics were sold with the excuse that a wife doesn't need to be fashionable, and of course, that money also went to Josie. Makeup was forbidden, and I was only allowed to wear sweatpants at home and a suit when outside. All my savings from my single days were confiscated. The dinners I made were thrown away. Plus, they were dumped on the floor, and Josie would laughingly take pictures with her phone and share them on social media. By the way, the only food I was allowed to eat was leftovers. "A perfect meal for a poor, pathetic person," she would say, sharing and laughing with her friends. Birds of a feather flocked together indeed, as my mother-in-law's friends were all wealthy and glamorous, yet they were all nasty people who looked down on others. Look at my poor daughter-in-law. How could she have lived like this until now? If it were me, I'd be too ashamed to live. I had no choice but to endure this humiliation. After enduring this life for about a year, my father-in-law passed away. He had been suffering from terminal cancer and had actually lived longer than the prognosis. I was tasked with preparing for his funeral. Kevin was swamped with taking over the company, so he had no time to prepare for the funeral. "I don't know anything about this. Rosemary, can you handle it for me?" Josie said and dumped everything on me, lounging around without lifting a finger. I became extremely busy preparing for my father-in-law's funeral, sparing no time for sleep, and my fatigue reached its limit. Somehow, I managed to finish the preparations, and the day of the funeral arrived. However, when I tried to attend the funeral, Josie stood in front of me and said something outrageous. "Rosemary, please just leave the gift and go home." I couldn't hide my surprise at this sudden request. "I don't consider you as family. Besides, if people find out that a plain and unattractive woman like you is Kevin's wife, it would be a disgrace to the whole family." From my perspective, my mother-in-law's hysterical ranting was far more embarrassing, but I knew that arguing back would only heat things up and cause more commotion. "Understood," I replied, and left the funeral venue after placing the gift. 3 days after the funeral, I was struck by mysterious nausea and ill health, so I went back to my parents' house to recuperate. I couldn't rest at home with Josie's harassment. My parents were at work, and I was resting alone in the living room when the doorbell rang. Looking at the camera, I saw Josie repeatedly ringing the doorbell. At first, I ignored it, but she kept ringing the doorbell and yelling at the front door, causing a nuisance to the neighbors, so I reluctantly opened the door. She probably came to take me back, her outlet for household stress and frustration. However, contrary to my expectations, Josie suddenly apologized to me. "What is going on?" I said, unable to suppress my annoyance, and Josie, in a desperate state, threw words of apology at me. "I didn't know. I had no idea it would come to this." So here's what happened. My father-in-law had noticed Josie's harassment towards me. Initially, Josie hid her true nature in front of my father-in-law and Kevin. But my father-in-law, sensing something off in Josie's relationship with me, confronted her, and she readily confessed. He tried to persuade her to stop the harassment several times, but Josie wouldn't listen. Instead, she became defiant and started bad-mouthing me to my father-in-law. For my father-in-law, who was in the final stages of cancer, persuading Josie was all he could manage. Feeling sorry for me as I was wasting away from the stress of Josie's harassment, my father-in-law left a will before passing away. It stated that he would leave all his inheritance to me. "Please, Rosemary, I apologize for everything. Share the inheritance with me," Josie begged desperately. "It's not fair. I was robbed of everything and then married. After taking everything from me, leaving me nothing is just wrong," she screamed in a state of confusion. There was a sad story behind the seemingly glamorous mother-in-law. Her marriage to her husband was a political one. Josie had a lover to whom she had promised to marry. However, her family's business was on the brink of bankruptcy at the time, so they agreed to assist Josie's family on the condition that she married my father-in-law. Josie's life was hell, forced apart from her fiancé, whom she had loved dearly, and marry a man she didn't like. My father-in-law also had a lover, but due but due to differences in social ranks, everyone around him strongly opposed the marriage, and they reluctantly parted ways. However, he seemed to have continued his relationship with his former lover, even after marrying Josie. On the other hand, Josie suffered terrible harassment from her mother-in-law, Kevin's grandmother, at a level incomparable to what I endured from Josie. She was virtually imprisoned, overworked, and forced to quit the job she loved. Because it was a political marriage, even her parents turned against her. Her husband was indifferent and prioritized his lover, and divorce was not allowed, nor was she allowed to see her former lover. In such a life, her only son Kevin was her sole reason for living. Josie finally regained her freedom when Kevin's grandmother passed away, but her love for her son had become completely twisted. She had harassed and driven away women who got close to Kevin. The reason Kevin, who was good-looking, well-off, from a good family, and presumably had no personality flaws, had no dating experience until the age of 30, was also due to his mother. Naturally, I was no exception. Josie could never forgive me, someone who had taken her son and had a proper marriage, something she was not allowed. So she tried every trick in the book to harass me and make Kevin and me divorce. I felt sorry for Josie after hearing her circumstances. However, Josie, I certainly sympathize with your situation, but... I approached Josie and whispered in her ear, "You've repeatedly called me poor and unattractive and made fun of me with your friends, you know. That was... You haven't forgotten about throwing away my food and messing up the room I just cleaned, have you? So that's what I'm sorry. Apologies don't solve everything, do they, Josie?" She was stunned by my words. While Josie's situation was pitiable, it didn't mean I could just pretend her harassment never happened. I won't give you the inheritance, I'll use it meaningfully for repaying my student loans and for the education of the child who will be born in the near future. No matter the circumstances, I would probably never forgive Josie for what she did to me. "I never thought you were like that. I misjudged you, Mom." Kevin's angry voice echoed through the living room. Kevin had learned about his mother's harassment towards me through the will. He also found out that she had harassed every woman who got close to him since his student days, and in his anger, he declared he no longer wanted any relations with her. "Rosemary, I'm sorry I didn't notice sooner." Kevin hugged me, crying and apologizing. It wasn't Kevin's fault, as he was too busy to come home often. I even felt guilty for making him cry and apologize. Josie, who was cut off by Kevin, was yelling something, but Kevin's determination was firm, and we as a couple decided to move out of the in-laws' house soon. I stayed at my parents' house until the move was complete. By the way, the in-laws' house was in Kevin's name, so it was quickly put up for sale. As a result, Josie had no choice but to leave the house, and is now forced to live alone in a cheap apartment. Since she's still in her 50s, she's working, something she's not used to. Also, word of her harassment spread throughout the neighborhood. Originally, she was disliked for flaunting her wealth and constantly showing off to those around her, and now she's become completely isolated from her neighbors. Even her former friends, who once praised Josie and laughed at me for being poor, have turned on her and are making fun of her now that she's living in poverty. Incidentally, Josie went to see her former fiancé for the first time in 30 years, but he had long forgotten about her, had married, and had a family. I also heard that she caused a scene at his doorstep, leading to police involvement. Her once prided beauty has also drastically changed due to stress. I recently saw Josie in town wearing tattered clothes, her face suddenly aged, and she had gained a lot of weight. On the other hand, Kevin successfully took over the company and became its president. The business is thriving and on the rise. We as a couple moved to a high-rise apartment close to my parents' home. We further increased the assets left by my father-in-law through investments and are leading a prosperous life. I vow to devote myself to my husband, Kevin, and the baby in my belly from now on.